Hello and welcome back to Ruben Uncut. Today, we're talking about Batman the Cape Crusader because I watched it all while I had COVID. In fact, I watched it twice because there's only 10 episodes, and frankly, they kick ass. So, what is Batman the Cape Crusader? Well, if you don't know, well, then you probably don't pay attention to Batman. In which case, I'm not sure what you're doing right here, right now. But the point is that Batman the Cape Crusader is the new animated Batman show from creator Bruce Timm, but also apparently produced by Matt Reeves and J.J. Abrams, making this the entire output, all $500 million that they gave to J.J. Abrams to run DC. I'm not saying that this show is worth $500 million, but at least what J.J. Abrams actually finally delivered was good. In fact, I would describe this as hella good. I enjoyed the absolute hell out of this Batman cartoon. Now, the show is controversial, and we're going to get into this as I go over the episodes, because I am going to talk about each episode and maybe even give them some type of score or something. I don't know. We'll talk about it. But there were some controversies that this Batman is woke. And I'm going to be talking about that in the various episodes, and we'll talk about how woke each episode is. Is the show woke? What does woke mean? Who knows? They made it up. All right. But if you don't want any spoilers, now is the time where I tell you the show kicks ass. It is a stunning homage to the original cartoon, minus the censorship getting in his way of telling these stories. Now, it's worth noting that there have been a lot of changes made to the lore. Now, these changes were made by Bruce Timm. It's worth noting that Bruce Timm had previously stated that he felt like he told all the Batman stories he had for that original animated universe, which is probably why he chose to make some pretty radical changes to some of the Batman lore. And we're going to be talking about that right here, right now, in just a moment. We got to start off by saying what follows will contain some spoilers, although not necessarily the same level of spoilerage for each episode. I just more want to be able to talk about the various themes of the episodes and why I appreciated them. Episode 1 features possibly one of the most talked about and controversial changes to the series. I'm, of course, talking about Oswalda Cobblepot. That is the Penguin. Yes, I said Oswalda. Oswald Cobblepot has been gender bent here into being a woman, and also a woman who does a lounge act at her very own boat-based nightclub, the Iceberg Lounge. That's all pretty in character, solid stuff. Now, Oswalda is a woman now. Oswalda has two sons, Ronnie and I forget the other one, shorter one. Name is escaping me right now. But as we find out in the story, that Oswalda is currently in a turf war against Boss Thorn. And her solution to Boss Thorn is a giant cannon that she's using to bomb the city that is currently disguised as an umbrella on top of her Iceberg Lounge boat. Now, in the episode, where we meet them, they are having a fundraiser for the police, as all good criminals would do in the time, to appear not criminally. This one started off right out the gate, letting me know that this is definitely going to be not like the cartoon in certain ways, when Oswalda drowns one of her sons almost right off the bat. Now, there's reasons for that, which I won't go into here, but honestly, as far as first episodes go, solid stuff. It's honestly not the most interesting of the episodes, if you look beyond the Oswalda thing. But what is here, I think, works. And I didn't have a problem at any point with Penguin being a woman. I think this is a solid episode. I'd give it like an 8 out of 10. Episode 2 is an episode about Clayface. Now, this time they've mixed Clayface 1 and 2 together a bit. That would be, this is the original Basil Carlo Clayface. Now, it's worth noting that Clayfaces in the cartoons have generally been sort of mashed together character-wise. There have actually been about 4 or 5 different Clayfaces in Batman's history, and not all of them with the same power set. For example, the original Clayface, Basil Karlo, in the comics, just a guy in a mask murdering other actors. Later, they would combine Basil Karlo with Clayface 2, also known as Matt Hagen. Matt Hagen was the first Clayface to feature the full-on Clayface powers. His and Basil Karlo's stories would be sort of combined in both the original animated series and this one as well. Although here they are going for much more of a Basil Karlo look, although he does still have Clayface powers. In this episode, though, they only show his Clayface powers in as far as his ability to change his physical image. And what I mean by that is he doesn't go full mud monster, which in fairness is more of a Matt Hagen thing than a Basil Karlo thing. This episode very much feels like a retelling of its cartoon version, the original animated version, I mean. Except it's played up much more into the, well, like I said, he doesn't go full mud monster. The emphasis is more here on the film noir aspects of it. That's another solid episode. I'd probably also give this one an 8. This also continues the advancement of the character Renee Montoya, who, just so you know, was actually originally created for the animated series and would jump quickly into the comic books as well, becoming partners with Harvey Bullock. Harvey Bullock's position in this series is also very different, which we'll get into. Episode 3, Kiss of the Catwoman, is a fun take on Catwoman. Now, the show Catwoman is interesting because Catwoman has for a long time been portrayed as sort of Batman's window into the poor. Now, that here has been sort of flipped on its head, unlike the version we saw in Matt Reeves' The Batman, or say a comic book example of Batman Year One. That Catwoman is very much a poor prostitute. I'm sorry, that's only in Batman Year One, not the Matt Reeves movie. I should be more clear there. Now, basically someone who is poor, down on their luck, and steals from the wealthy. However, here, she is a rich socialite. Well, kind of. She is a broke socialite who only sort of skates by in society via her affluence. However, after seeing Batman in the newspaper, she decides that she would like to also be a criminal. And, I mean, sorry, she decides that she would also like to be a costumed person, except in her cases, she goes around stealing instead of stopping crimes. Now, Batman, of course, doesn't care for this, so he stops her. And Harvey Bullock and his, in this series, his partner, Flass, well, they bring her in. However, both them and Batman are frustrated when the legal system basically looks at her and are like, she got affluenza. She's just a mixed up, poor rich person. Because that's what she is. She is a mixed up, poor, rich person. She is a rich person who is flat broke. Which is also why Harvey Dent's not very super interested in prosecuting her. Harvey Dent plays a huge part of this series, and I won't go into it all, but basically his is the story that the series is kind of building up the whole time. On his way to becoming Two-Face. The Catwoman episode is very interesting, and it allows us to look at both rich people and poor people from a different lens. Batman eventually does get Catwoman put away. Part of which is because Catwoman's sort of sidekick character of a very annoyed maid who hasn't been paid in a long time is quite amusing as well. Also, the classic Golden Age Catwoman costume, looking good. I dig it. I would give this episode like a 9. Now, Mayor Jessup, which, by the way, Two-Face is currently running to become mayor. But the current Mayor Jessup in episode 4 basically insists that Commissioner Gordon has got to assemble a task force to catch the Batman. And this task force is initially led by Renee Montoya. Now, this episode contains... Now, this the series is interesting in a certain way when it comes to race. Now, I haven't mentioned this, but Commissioner Gordon and Barbara Gordon are black in this series. The episode, the series never directly lays its racial politics out for the audience, but if you pay attention, it is there in the background being subtly referenced. For example, in this episode, when when Commissioner Gordon is having trouble capturing the Batman, there is a brief line that implies that Gordon got his job because the mayor thought it would be progressive press to essentially hire a black man. There are also references earlier on to the amount of people who are hoping that Commissioner Gordon will fail. The show also, while the show never directly addresses racism, it's clearly something that's sort of going on in the background. This, however, will come up more prominently in episode 6, which I haven't gotten to yet. But in this episode, Mayor Jessup has Commissioner Gordon assemble a task force initially led by Renee Montoya, one of the only cops that he trusts. However, over the course of this attempts to capture Batman, which are largely unsuccessful, thanks to the psychological analysis of one Dr. Harley Quinzel, Flass and Bullock get an idea to essentially take a masked weirdo and set him free in hopes that he will attract Batman's attention, which he does. They release Firebug. In the comics, he's normally known as Firefly. I'm not sure what the bit they're doing here, calling him Firebug. But it works with him setting fire to a building and Batman and Commissioner Gordon having to work together to save people from that burning building. Now, another thing that's been happening here is that Harvey Bullock ends up being pressured by Flass into killing Firebug. Now, this plays into a lot of different things. Essentially, Harvey Bullock is Detective Flass's sort of fall guy henchman type. Basically, he makes sure that Bullock has his fingerprints on all the guns that are dirty. Something that will be brought up later on. Now, I gotta tell you, I'm a huge Harvey Bullock fan. Harvey Bullock doesn't get a lot of representation. And while I am hoping that season 2 will feature some type of redemption for Harvey Bullock, it's not unfounded to have him be somewhat dirty in the comics. There is precedent for that. Now, I sincerely doubt we're going to get all of Harvey Bullock's weird backstory. In the comics, Harvey Bullock has kind of a weird mixed backstory with some very different representations of what type of police officer he is or what his background is. In the pre-New 52 continuity, he wasn't just a cop, he was also a member of Checkmate, which is something that happened in the Suicide Squad comics, interestingly enough. There's also, of course, Earth 2 Harvey Bullock is an actor who becomes a real cop. And it does not go well for him. And episode 5 is the Harley Quinn episode. Now, I saw some people calling Harley Quinn fat on the internet, and I gotta tell you right now, first of all, Harley Quinn is not fat. Now, I watched a little bit of a show called Nerdrotic, where a bunch of losers talked about how terrible this show was because they're losers and they didn't have real complaints. And when I say they didn't have real complaints, I mean literally they thought all the women on the show were fat because they were wearing shirts with shoulder pads. All the women are wearing jackets with shoulder pads, by the way. They're not fat. They're wearing shoulder pads. Hilarious, Nerdrotic. Hilarious. Are they drawn a little bit thicker? I mean, one could argue that Renee Montoya is a little Ruben-esque. And Harley Quinn definitely has dead ass. I mean, I'm not going to deny this Harley Quinn's ass. She got that ass. I'm not complaining either. But to call her fat, yeah, like I still wouldn't say that she was fat. She just has that ass. Renee Montoya, maybe a little Ruben-esque, but still, generally speaking, Nerdrotic, you're overselling it because you don't understand shoulder pads, which is hilarious. The only woman who's actually drawn as fat is Oswalda. But in episode 5, essentially, this is the Harley Quinn episode. Harley Quinn has been in the background story-wise with an implied romance between her and Renee Montoya, who, in fairness, Renee Montoya is a lesbian and Harley Quinn is bisexual. Now, I mentioned that there is like some racial politics that's like heavily in the background, but there doesn't really seem to be any of this for women being lesbians in the 40s. Don't know why. Maybe they just didn't want to address it. And in fairness, does Batman need to address homophobia? Not sure. But in episode 5, one of the things that we've been setting up here is Harley Quinn is a psychiatrist, has been kidnapping and brainwashing the wealthy men, some of the worst wealthy men in Gotham, and getting them to give all their money away. Now, Batman is immediately suspicious because he knows these rich men, and he knows that they are not generous, but they are, in fact, greedy pieces of shit. So he's immediately like, somebody's probably making them give their money away, which he is correct. Now, it's worth noting that in a previous episode, Harley Quinn was actually Batman's therapist. Now, whether or not she was planning to kidnap Bruce Wayne, hard to say. He was just there. Oh, it was the Catwoman episode. That's right. Yeah. No, he had to get court mandated psychotherapy because he punched a guy for talking shit about his dead mom. The point is that in the series, this is sort of like the thing that happens is that like Batman, he literally is resistant to therapy. It's worth noting, though, that Alfred is the consistent voice of, you need therapy. Have you considered empathy? Throughout the series, which is great. In fact, it is, no, we'll get to that. Alfred's great. Alfred is great. He is drawn fat, but that is golden age appropriate. His character was originally portly. He was slimmed down for the 1960s TV show. A lot of changes were made to the comic for the 1960s TV show, by the way. But let's move along. But basically, Batman gets into a whole thing with this. Barbara Gordon is also friends with Harley Quinn and comes to save Batman. In fairness, though, dear Barbara, you need to get better on your detective skills. I understand that you're a public defender, but come on. There's actually a sequence where she's trying to save Batman by breaking the glass door with a bat, but all she does is damage the door so it can't be opened with the button anymore. So, Batgirl, I'm begging you, try the buttons first next time. Try all the buttons first. It's a fairly entertaining episode where Harley Quinn seems to possibly die, but, it's ambiguous. They fall in water. Honestly, I'm certain we'll see Harley Quinn again in season 2. Episode 6, though, is honestly one of the most interesting in terms of the absolute subtext of it, because this is the Gentleman Ghost episode. The Gentleman Ghost episode is pretty wild because it's basically all about Batman fighting a fascist ghost. No. I'm being serious. A racist, fascist, classist ghost. Gentleman Ghost shows up, and he's out here robbing the poor to give to the rich. We expect. It's not actually clear what a ghost is doing with money. But it is very interesting as the show progresses, because there's several things about it that are worth noting. For starters, the ghost is clearly racist. The episode never really addresses the racism directly, but the ghost clearly has a problem with Black people and other ethnic minorities / the poor. When we first meet the ghost, Batman, he is essentially robbing an armored car that is delivering money to a charity. And then, later in the episode, he robs a train car full of poor people. Now, this sequence is actually kind of hilarious because Harvey Dent is doing like a press event on the train, trying to get the poor people on board with his campaign for mayor. But what ends up happening is that the ghost refuses to rob Harvey Dent because he's an affluent white man. And then immediately turns to rob an ethnically drawn cartoon character on the train. It's kind of hilarious how badly that campaign stop backfired for Harvey Dent there. Now, Batman, he's not used to dealing with ghosts, so he actually goes to who appears to be Papa Midnight. I think I actually missed the name of the guy, but he essentially has to go talk to a magician about catching this guy. And there's an implication that the gentleman ghost in this, who I think is Papa Midnight. It's a deep cut, whoever, which if it's either Papa Midnight or an even deeper cut. But the point is that there is an implication that at some point in history, Papa Midnight may have been owned by the Gentleman Ghost. Or the Gentleman Ghost is very afraid to be owned by Papa Midnight as it develops later on. The Gentleman Ghost episode is interesting. The Gentleman Ghost also seems pretty upset with the fact that his ancestor is ready to essentially liquidate his assets through a black lawyer, Lucius Fox. It's also shown that the Gentleman Ghost is a former loyalist. So he's a monarchist, technically. He's someone who was, because he sided with Britain in the Revolutionary War, his history of being a founder of Gotham has been stricken from the record because he sided with the British. And it's a very interesting episode, but it also is a very clear example of how the show wants to talk about race, but never seems to want to talk about race directly. And I'm very intrigued by this. Why are they toning down the racial commentary? Like, it's clearly here. If you look close enough, you will see it in the background of the show. But there seems to be a resistance to actively saying it out loud, actively being like, that ghost is racist, actively being like, the Commissioner Gordon is dealing with a lot of issues because he's black. The show seems to have a resistance to saying these things out loud, and I'm not sure if this is like a fear of being perceived as woke, but if it actually were saying these things out loud, then I could actually say that the show is kind of woke. But the reality is it's more politically correct than woke, with positive representation for minorities. Honestly, though, the Gentleman Ghost episode is an episode I initially didn't vibe with, but upon watching it the second time, I was like, okay, that's actually a damn good episode. You can't beat Batman fighting a racist ghost, you know? It's classic. Give it like an 8 or a 9. Episode 7 is interesting because episode 7 features the Batman villain for episode 7 is actually a Green Arrow villain. But, you know, Green Arrow's stolen so many villains from Batman. It's totally cool that Batman would take Onomatopoeia. Yes, that is the name of his character. And as far as Batman villains go, he is clearly someone who has taken his autism to the next level. I mean, his power, he doesn't have a power. He essentially is just a hitman with, he's just a hitman with echolalia. Essentially, he makes noises with his mouth, sound effects. And he doesn't really talk. Although the comics have confirmed that he can talk. This is a choice that he does when in costume. But the episode itself is pretty good stuff. Essentially, we think there's a hit out on Commissioner Gordon, but it turns out to be on Barbara Gordon. And it also features future Spectre, corrupt, in this situation, corrupt cop. I believe he was a corrupt cop before he became the Spectre. Jim Corrigan makes an appearance here before being the Spectre, which is a fun cameo. Now, this next episode is actually my least favorite episode of the series. Just because it's a little weird. I mean, it's not bad, but it is, I don't know. I wasn't sure where the episode was trying to go with some of the stuff that it was doing. But in this episode, Batman faces Nocturne, who is like an energy vampire. I actually don't know how closely connected their characters actually are in the comics. But Nocturne has had a lot of different variations and alterations to her character and origin throughout the years. But here, Batman runs into her at a carnival where she is sapping the life out of future Robins. No, I'm not kidding. Over the course of the episode, she kidnaps or attempts to kidnap 4 children. By the way, Nocturne is also a child. But Nocturne essentially attempts to kidnap 4 different children who are Dickie, Jason, Steffi Brown, and Carrie Kelly. If you don't know those names, those are all Robins. And like the thing that kind of throws me off about the episode a little bit is like, are they meant to be the future Robins? If not, if so, I'm a little. Actually, I'm not sure which is worse in this regard. I'm a little offended there was no Tim Drake. Now, that doesn't mean there can't be a Tim Drake in the future. But I mean, in fairness, Tim Drake is the only one of those people who isn't an orphan. Wait, Carrie Kelly's not an orphan. What the? And there's also no Damien, but I guess that makes sense that there's no Damien. We haven't even met Talia yet. But it is a little bit weird that all four of them are like clearly Robins. Are they all? At some point, Batman's just like, you know what? I'm gonna adopt all four of them kids. All four of them. Train them to be soldiers in my unending war. The episode also features some other amusing stuff in it that's pretty solid. We follow more of Harvey Dent on his journey into corruption. And the episode also features a sequence where Batman gets beat up by Killer Croc and the Bearded Woman, who both mistake him for a PDF file when he's trying to find the missing children. I mean, they had good intentions in beating him up, but, you know, they were hindering him from rescuing actual children. And he wasn't dressed as Batman. He was just Bruce Wayne. So they just thought he was a regular creepy guy looking for little girls. Eventually, the episode's not bad. I am talking about it like it's my least exciting episode for me, because it kind of is. I would still give it a 7. I'd say it's still a decent time, and it moves the Dent plot forward. But it was the episode I was least super thrilled about, and I didn't know. There's a part of me that still doesn't really know what to make of like all the kids being future Robins or having the same name. If it's just the same name as like a weird Easter egg, then I am offended there was no Tim. But if they are meant to be future Robins, then I guess it makes sense that Tim wouldn't be here, considering his backstory differs from the other Robins pretty significantly. Now, to be fair, I almost forgot one very significant thing about this episode, which is that it ends with Two-Face getting the acid thrown in his face. Brings us into episode 9, which is the episode where essentially we watch Two-Face's sense of sanity start to come apart. We start to see the development of his second personality. Now, kind of like the Dark Knight, the second personality is only really alluded to, and we don't really get to full on see the distinctive difference between them, which is kind of a shame. But in episode 9, essentially what we get is Two-Face decides to go all man on fire. And by that, I mean he gets himself a revenge spree, where he goes around killing the people who done him wrong. And it's pretty cool. I will say this, though, about Harvey. You know, in most revenge stories run off the concept of fridging, which is when you kill a character who was specifically created to give the main character an emotional thing to have taken away from them. It's funny because technically the thing that got fridged for Harvey Dent is his face and his political career, which in his mind is enough a reason to just go out and kill everyone who's responsible. He doesn't get to Thorn, though. Batman stops him. Which brings us to our final episode of the season, where Harvey Dent tries to get back on his kill spree. However, he can't, because his public defender, Barbara Gordon, won't let him. In fact, she handcuffs herself to him so that he's forced to go with her, as her, Batman, her father, and Renee Montoya try to bring down the corrupt cops and also Boss Thorne. They don't successfully get Boss Thorne, but they do bring down Flass. How this will affect Harvey Bullock in the following seasons, who knows? But it's a hell of a final episode. In fact, honestly, both the final episodes are like easy 9s or 10s. Arguably, episode 9 is mostly a retelling of what happened to Two-Face in the original animated series, but here, of course, you know, it's PG-13, so he can actually kill some people and get some revenge for this, you know, face. The face is also not blue, a decision I'm pretty sure was originally born out of censorship. Now it looks a little bit more like someone just fucking melted through part of his face. The voice acting is great. It took me a minute to get used to the new Batman voice, him not being, you know, rest in peace, Kevin Conroy. Lois Lane also shows up briefly in a fun cameo. It'll be very interesting to see where the show would go with season 2. I'm excited about this. This honestly, I thought this was good stuff. Good stuff. I dig it. Bring it on. I want more of this. Anyone who says it should be canceled, well, they can suck it, because honestly, this was a blast. I highly, highly recommend Batman the Caped Crusader. If you haven't watched it already, which you should have, if you're listening to me right now. I would honestly give most of this season like a 9 or a 10. There's just a little bit of some minor things holding it back from being like a 10 out of 10 for me, to be completely honest. Definitely checked out Batman the Caped Crusader. It's on Amazon Prime right now. Anyways, thank you for tuning in. I hope you had a good time. Please like and subscribe if you're on YouTube, or you can comment on the Spotify now, which is different. And yeah, if you want to contact the program, you can email me at rubenuncut@gmail.com. Frankly, I'm just excited to do an episode that's not about politics. Because politics just be racking my brain lately. Society is a pain in the ass. All right. Thank you for tuning in. Have a wonderful whatever, wherever, whoever you are.